If you ever find a traffic light in the forest, don't move if it turns red. Just before my 11th birthday, my grandfather had invited me along for a 2-day hunting trip in the deep woods up north, close to where he'd grown up as a child. He'd been going there his whole life and said it was good ground for deer, and that the air always carried the scent of old pines and wet moss. That morning couldn't have been better. The sky was pale blue, and the air crisp enough to sting a bit when you breathe deep. We walked slowly down the trail, taking turns with the binoculars to look at birds. He'd point out their names like he was listing old friends. Around noon, we found some late-season lingonberries and filled a small tin cup before moving on. A few hours later we met another hiker coming down the trail. My grandfather greeted him by name. He was an older man with a red jacket and a face that looked weathered but kind. They started talking about local fishing spots and timber prices, things I had no interest in at the time. The sun was already approaching the horizon, casting orange light through the branches. I remember thinking it'd be nice to find a place to camp before dark. So, being young and impatient, I told them I'd go ahead a little to look for a spot. My grandfather just nodded and said not to go too far. The forest was quiet, apart from the wind and the occasional distant bird call. I spotted a small clearing just off the trail and pushed my way through a wall of pine branches. That's when I saw it, a tall, thin shape standing among the trees. At first, I thought it was a dead spruce, its bark stripped away and rust-colored. But as I walked closer, I realized it was made of metal. The rusted pole was crowned by a traffic light. Its lenses were cracked, and the signal housing was coated in a thin layer of moss. Yet there was a light inside, a faint green glow, flickering every few seconds like a weak heartbeat. I stood there staring, trying to make sense of it. There were no roads anywhere near this part of the forest, no wires, no sign of anything man-made except the traffic light itself. I remember thinking my grandfather would get a kick out of it. I jogged back to where he was still talking with the other man and told them I'd found something cool a bit further up the trail. He humored me, as he always did, and they both followed me back to the clearing. When we reached the spot, the traffic light was still there. I pointed at it, excited. "Do you think there used to be a road here?" I asked. "Maybe an old neighborhood or something." He didn't answer. I looked back at him. Color had drained from his face, and his eyes were locked on the light. The other man looked confused and was about to ask my grandfather something, but before he could speak, the green light had faded and was replaced by a yellow. That was when my grandfather moved. He grabbed me and pulled me tight against his chest. "Don't move," he said, his voice trembling. Then he called out to the other man, "Stand still. Don't move a muscle." The forest went silent. No birds, no wind. I could feel my grandfather's heartbeat quickening. "What's going on?" the man asked, his voice edged with a tone of confusion. I heard him take a step. Maybe two. Then came the scream. It started sharp and turned into something animal, long, broken, echoing through the trees until it suddenly cut off. I felt my grandfather flinch slightly, but he didn't loosen his grip. We stood there for what felt like forever, frozen in place. The air smelled of metal, and a low humming seemed to come from all directions at once. My hair lifted slightly as if an electric charge was building overhead. Somewhere far off, a bird called, breaking the silence. My grandfather suddenly let go of me. He stumbled slightly and struggled to catch his balance before sinking onto a small rock. His legs shook from standing still for so long. I looked up at the traffic light. It had changed back to green. As we walked back to the trail, my grandfather had his arm wrapped around me and told me to keep my eyes closed. I wasn't supposed to look, but I did, a quick glance as we passed the remains of what had once been a person. A pile of clothes lay on the ground, charred, with thin wisps of smoke rising from them. The surrounding grass was stained dark red. Our trip was obviously cut short, and we made our way back to the car in the dark. Since then, I've asked my grandfather multiple times over the years about what he saw after the light presumably changed to red, but he has refused to speak of it. As far as I know, the man we met on the trail that day is still listed as missing by the police. I think my grandfather knows more than he lets on about what we found. I've thought about going back there for years to see if it's still there, but I haven't dared. Not yet.